Hey guys, we are on chapter 3, so get ready. Going to die, Brian thought. Going to die. Gonna die. Gonna die. His whole brain screamed it in the sudden silence. Gonna die. He wiped his mouth with the back of his arm and held the nose down. The plane went into a glide, and very fast glide, that ate altitude, and suddenly there weren't any lakes. All he'd seen since they started flying over the forest was lakes, and now they were gone. Gone. Out in front, far away in the horizon, he could see lots of them. Off to the right and left, more of them glittering blue in the late afternoon sun, but he needed one right in front. He desperately needed a lake right in front of the plane, and all he saw through the windshield were trees. Green death trees. If he had to turn, he didn't think he could keep the plane flying. His stomach tightened into a series of rolling knots, and his breath came in short bursts. There, not quite in front, but slightly to the right, he saw a lake, L-shaped, with rounded corners, and the plane was nearly aimed at the long part of the L. So you know what an L looks like. It's the long part right there. Coming from the bottom and heading to the top, just a tiny bit to the right, he pushed the right rudder pedal gently and the nose moved over. But the turn cost him speed, and now the lake was above the nose. He pulled back on the wheel slightly and the nose came up. This caused the plane to slow dramatically and almost seemed to stop and wallow in the air. The controls became very loose feeling and frightened Brian, making him push the wheel back in. This increased the speed a bit, but filled the windshield once more with nothing but trees, and put the lake well above the nose and out of reach for a space of 3 or 4 seconds. Things seemed to hang almost to stop. The plane was flying, but so slowly it would never reach the lake. Brian looked out to the side and saw a small pond, and at the edge of the pond, some large animal? He thought a moose, standing out in the water, also still looking so stopped. The pond and the moose and the trees, as he slid over them now, only 300 or 400 feet off the ground, all like a picture. Then everything happened at once. Trees suddenly took on detail, filled his whole field of vision with green, and he knew he would hit and die. Would die, but his luck held, and just as he was to hit, he came into an open lake, a channel of fallen trees, a wide place leading to the lake. The plane, committed now to landing, to crashing, fell into the wide place like a stone, and Brian eased back on the wheel and braced himself for the crash. But there was a tiny bit of speed left, and when he pulled on the wheel, the nose came up, and he saw in front the blue of the lake, and at that instant, the plane hit the trees. There was a great wrenching as the wings caught the pines at the side of the clearing and broke back, ripping back just outside the main braces. Dust and dirt blew off the floor into his face so hard he thought there must have been some kind of explosion. He was momentarily blinded and slammed forward in the seat, smashing his head on the wheel. Then a wild crashing sound, ripping of metal, and the plane rolled to the right and blew through the trees, out over the water and down to slam into the lake. Skip once on the water as hard as concrete. Water that tore the windshield out and shattered the side windows. Water that drove him back into the seat. Somebody was screaming as the plane drove down into the water. Someone screamed tight animal screams of fear and pain. And he did not know that it was his sound. That he roared against the water that took him, and the plane still deeper down in the water. He saw nothing but sensed blue, cold blue-green, and he raked at the seatbelt catch, tore his nails loose on one hand. He ripped at it until he released, and somehow the water, trying to kill him, to end him. Somehow he pulled himself out of the shattered front window and clawed up into the blue, felt something hold him back, felt his windbreaker, his jacket, tear, and he was free, tearing free, ripping free, but so far to the surface, and his lungs could not do this thing, could not hold, and were through, and he sucked water, took a great pull of water that would finally take him, and his head broke into light, and he vomited and swam, pulling without knowing what he was doing, without knowing anything, pulling until his hands caught at weeds and muck, pulling and screaming until his hands caught at last in grass and brush, and he felt his chest on land, felt his face in the coarse blades of grass, and he stopped. Everything stopped. A color came that he had never seen before, a color that exploded in his mind with pain, and he was gone from it all, spiraling out into the world, spiraling out into nothing. So he's crashed now, and possibly just blacked out. I'll tell you, sometimes if you've been out in PE and you're dehydrated and you're running hard, you might start seeing like flashes of orange and red, and then like your eyesight kind of gets funny, and that sometimes happens right before you pass out. So Brian just was in a plane crash, and the plane went into the water, and he had to tear at the seatbelt because he was still strapped in, and his fingernails ripped off, and he had to swim as much as he could, but his lungs, they couldn't keep his breath. He couldn't hold on anymore, and he gulped in some of the water. So then when he finally swam and he broke through, what did he do? Maybe go back and check. And look back at your questions too. So chapters 3 and 4, where does the plane crash? What do you know about the secret? We didn't hear anything about the secret. So if it's not in chapter 3, it must be in chapter 4. Okay. Brian loses consciousness after the crash. Where is he when he first revives, and how does he feel? Well, at least we know from that question that Brian's not dead. And I mean, really, we're only in chapter 3, so for him to die, that'd be kind of a boring book. But anyway, make sure you're keeping up with your stuff. Make sure you're writing out your answers and you're finding your page number. Make sure you're keeping up with everything because you're going to have to type out all these answers on Thursday. Okay, get ready for chapter 4.